Right, I think we'll get started. Hey everyone, and thanks so much for attending our session today. And thank you Resource Recycling for putting together a great conference. My name is Maite Quinn and I am Managing Director at Closed Loop Partners. Today, we're going to be speaking with 3 key leaders from the recycling industry to get a better understanding of how the green fence and COVID has impacted their material streams, labor, and everyday business. Please put your questions in the comment section and we'll get to them towards the end of the session. First, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us how you got into the recycling industry. Also, introduce your company and how your company is unique. Let's start with Kate.
Sure, thanks, Maite. Nice to, well, I can't see everybody, but nice to be here today. I'm Kate Davenport, one of the co-presidents of Eureka Recycling. We're a zero waste social enterprise based in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And our mission is to demonstrate that waste is preventable, not inevitable. We operate a recycling collections enterprise as well as a MRF. We do about 100,000 tons per year. And I think what makes us unique is that not-for-profit aspect, in that we're doing recycling from the perspective of how does zero waste and recycling help address climate change, support local economic resiliency, and address environmental and social justice. So we're really trying to push the needle in terms of how recycling supports those things, and that shows up in how we run the business every day. So we do have the 2 largest recycling contracts in the state of Minnesota for the city of St. Paul and Minneapolis, about 120 staff. And then to answer Maite's question of how I got into all of this, you know, I did international development work in microfinance and microenterprise in East Africa when I graduated from college, and really became aware of how wasteful Americans are and how a lot of the rest of the world views resources as having value. And I got really interested in composting and food waste because you see a lot of places in the rest of the world that uses food waste as an added nutrient. And so I got into the composting business in Washington, D.C. back in the mid-2000s, and that got me into all the rest of it. So, but really being outside of the United States and seeing how other people view waste as resources, what got me into all of this.
Awesome. Well, we're glad that you did get into it for sure. Brent, hand it over to you.
Good. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Maite. My name is Brent Hildebrand, and I'm the Vice President of Recycling for GFL's United States operations. My role really encompasses or oversees all of our safety and operational needs, sales of inbound and outbound material, and then financial reporting responsibilities of our MRFs in the U.S. I do have a counterpart that covers all of Canada. His name is Stephen Miranda. I think our company, you know, has a little bit of a unique perspective with the 2 different countries in different stages of waste diversion initiatives. You know, I mentioned Stephen in Canada, and he's in the middle of a serious shift in the processing outlook, with EPR playing a large role in his business, and I'm lucky enough to have a front row seat to how that is kind of shaking out north of the border. So I think that's a little bit of a unique thing for us. I've been in the business now for over 25 years. I started on the waste side of the business, and it was kind of an accident, to be real honest with everybody, how I migrated over towards the recycling processing world. A few years into the waste business, I was actually looking at some of our reports on the recycling that our company was delivering to a third party. And, you know, I noticed those fluctuating commodities and that side of the business immediately caught my attention. So shortly after that, I went to work for one of the largest independent recycling companies in the country. Learned a lot, had a lot of good mentors in that business. And then we were purchased about 5 years after that by one of the larger publicly traded companies. And then I decided to build my own recycling center in Denver, Colorado. And things just kind of took off from there. So that's kind of my background in a nutshell, and happy to be here today. Appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks, Brent.
Yep.
Palace.
Good afternoon, good morning. I guess it depends on where folks are. I'm Palace Steps, President and General Manager of Sonoco Recycling. I've been in, and let me tell you about Sonoco Recycling. We are a recycling business that is owned by a packaging company, Sonoco Products Company, and we are predominantly located in the Southeast U.S. with respect to plant infrastructure. We have 20 recycling plants. 4 of those are MRFs. Our primary focus is supplying fiber to our paper division in Sonoco. I've been in the paper and packaging industry for about 28 years, in the last 2 of those years in recycling. So still relatively new. In fact, Friday of this week will be my 2-year anniversary officially in the recycling business. And how I got into it is simply our CEO came to me and said, "How'd you like to run recycling?" That was the long and short of it, but it's been an exciting time for me. I've enjoyed it. Needless to say, I came in at a very interesting time in the recycling world, and I'm very excited about where we're headed as a company, corporately, as well as Sonoco Recycling.
Awesome. Oh, you might hear an alarm in the background, so I'll be quick with my next question. Someone's cooking something downstairs, and they just gave us a fire warning. So now I'll ask several questions for the group. I'm going to open it to all the panelists. Tell us about life pre-Green Sword 2013. When you heard those warning signs, did you think it was going to last, or was it just like an other market hurdle to get over? How did you prepare yourself, or how did you not prepare yourself?
I can take a stab.
Great.
We were not surprised by what happened with Green Fence and then with National Sword. As a mission-based recycler, we've approached recycling, as I mentioned before, from having environmental benefit. And so have always had a philosophy of knowing where is our material going and what is it getting turned into and what's the environmental benefit of that. Really wanting traceability in terms of where we sell our material. So not just about does someone buy it, but is it really getting turned into something? So we actually never accepted 3 through 7s because we were aware that the 3s and the 6s and the 7s really weren't getting recycled. It was really the 5s that were being pulled out. We actually lost a couple city contracts because we wouldn't accept 3 through 7s. And the cities wanted to have that all plastics in message. So we weren't that surprised actually when Green Sword happened. We actually said we were going to accept just 5s, which has really worked out well for us. So as other, I think, programs really struggled with what to do with those 3 through 7 bales, we didn't. And I think that's a lesson. Obviously, I think that's a lesson for the rest of the industry, and that we really do need to understand what's happening to material and what's it getting turned into, not just does someone want to buy it. And I think it was a hard lesson learned by the industry, but I think it's really important.
Yeah, I'll jump in and dovetail on a couple of things Kate mentioned. For me, I think it really goes back even further. I kind of have to go back and then work my way forward a little bit here, so bear with me. But it goes back to my days of working for an independent recycling company. Looking back at it, they were kind of ahead of their time and did a phenomenal job of data collection and analyzation. We used to weigh the newspaper every single day. And in Colorado, there used to be 2, so we'd weigh 2 newspapers every day and just follow the trend on what that commodity was doing from a weight perspective. And that really dovetailed onto all the other commodities too. So, well, I didn't know it at the time. In the late 90s, I was really being taught to watch that stream and how it changes. And then I was fortunate enough to learn another valuable lesson when I opened up my processing center, which was late 2007 in Colorado. A year later, we hit that late 2008, early 2009 recession. Little did I know at the time, going through that recession, it would probably set me up for the rest of my career. I made the conscious effort when I initially started to create a very high quality product. I wanted to be known in the industry because everybody knows you can get a reputation. I wanted to be known as a facility that created a very high focus on quality. So when things started to happen, finally now getting up to green fence, green sword, when things started to happen, I was lucky enough where I was able to move materials. I did keep them domestically before that. Similar to what Kate was saying, I was really concerned where it was going, but I was able to keep materials flowing through that those hard times with Green Sword and Green Fence. And I even had mills tell me they wished everybody took quality as serious as I did. And I think a mill would probably tell you, that they would probably want to buy higher quality in the lower times than from somebody that's producing that kind of quality than others. So the quality perspective for me was a pretty big piece of getting through those times. That's kind of the long answer and the short answer there.
And Maite, my perspective is going to be a little bit different than I think Brent and Kate's perspectives. At the time when Green Fence and National Sort were announced, I was a part of Sonoco's paper business. And I can tell you from the paper division standpoint, we didn't believe that the Chinese could actually follow through on what they had promised to do, simply because of market dynamics. They don't have a lot of trees in China. They weren't going to be able to make virgin fiber. And if they weren't going to accept waste products from the North American market, and we were their largest supplier, it just wasn't doable from our vantage point. And so I don't think we were as prepared for it until it started to actually happen. And in fact, I'd say up until the very last month, where they had issuing permits to import OCC, we believe that there might be some sort of change of mind, if you will, from the government's vantage point. So not a lot of, we were prepared in the sense that, we had done everything that we could do in preparation for it, but I don't know that we really believed it was going to happen, that they were going to follow through.
Yeah, that's super, super interesting. So which commodities did you think were most at risk for not having a home? Did you switch up grades? Did you make new commodities, or did you have more waste in the end? Like, did you start cleaning up and noticing that your waste did go up? And how did it affect your bottom line?
I'll start if you want. Mixed paper was a very vulnerable grade, certainly for us in our recycling plants. It had been, frankly, an arena or a product, I should say, that had a lot of contamination in it. And if contamination was their objective to remove from the products they imported, that was a product that we were clearly in trouble with. I can't tell you, because of my answer from the last question, that we took a whole lot of affirmative steps to head off what was going to happen to us with respect to mixed paper. We had internal uses. I guess one of the things that we did was that we put more through our paper mills than we had historically. It's probably the largest and most noted change.
Great. Anyone else have anything else to add?
Yeah, I would just say, Brent touched on this before, but I mean, I think we've always, as an independent, been really focused on quality, which has meant that we've gotten long-term contracts with folks. So we had a long-term contract with a paper mill for all of our paper grades. And so I think that really helped us in terms of weathering that storm. Doesn't mean we weren't impacted by price, but we could move the paper, which I think was really important. And I'll just speak, I think in some of the high markets, we were probably losing revenue in terms of extra premium because we weren't playing the market. But in terms of how that averaged out overall, I think it's benefited us in terms of having some of those long-term supply agreements with paper mills. I think the other piece too is just what helped us buffer some of that was having revenue share agreements with our customers, so that we didn't bear the entire downfall there in terms of loss of revenue on the paper side.
Yeah, I'll just again, dovetail on Kate here. I couldn't agree more on the long-term contract side of things. I think it helps everybody in the chain, right? It helps the mill know what's coming, helps the processor budget a little better. Those long-term agreements, I agree with Kate, and they even out over time and as far as taking advantage of premiums. The other thing I'd say is I think our business, it's full of very opportunistic entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they look at the stream, and when this was happening, they looked at their mixed paper and they said, you know what? There's a lot of OCC in there, and we have to meet these quality restrictions.
Yeah.
We're going to get that OCC out, and we're gonna have a little more revenue because of it. Now there's some investments, and I think we'll talk about that later. But I think there was a lot of opportunistic processors that really looked at this and took advantage of it, and did some things that probably even surprised some of them. But the other piece, like Kate mentioned, with the inbound stream, it really focused me on better contract management on the inbound stream as well. So, a lot of those contracts were out of whack for a lot of people back then. They're no longer out of whack, I think, for the most part. Hopefully people don't forget in the current environment. But I think inbound contract management is a massive piece to how a facility operates as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because, our industry, for so many years, there was no investments made. I feel like the recycling is so behind the times. But I think in the past 8 years, I think we're just accelerating and we're moving so much faster, and you see people investing, and it might have a lot to do with, long-term contracts. Like, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, when you decided to make those investments, was it because of long-term contracts or anything else?
I can speak to that. I think we've definitely seen the speed of need for capital investment, that pace has quickened. So we've done about between $1.5 to $2 million every about 2 years over the last 10 years or so. And I think part of that is because the stream is changing so much. So Brent, I think you hit on this, but about the time that National Sort happened, also, we were seeing the amount of OCC in our stream quadruple. I don't know, significantly increase with e-commerce. And so we've just continued to need to make investments every couple of years because we're seeing more plastic. We're seeing lightweighting of plastic. We're seeing more cardboard. And so as that stream changes, we need to invest a lot more. And I think there was kind of a perfect storm there with what happened with China and increased focus on quality specs. I think the challenge, we've invested in more optics as we've seen more PET and plastic, for example. We just installed robotics this year to pull PET and aluminum and HDPE out of the paper stream, because inevitably you do get containers in that paper stream. And so one of the reasons we invested in those robots as opposed to optics is downtime. And I think it's something that's not talked about adequately, which is it's really hard for a MRF to shut down and for even 2 weeks to install new equipment. And so I think that's a challenge we're going to keep needing to talk about, is we can't stop the flow of incoming material to shut down, to completely reconfigure and install some of the new technology that's out there. So how do we deal with that in terms of where investment is needed, where there's innovation, but just that continual flow of material?
Sure. So go ahead.
No, apologize there. I would just say that it has been a very interesting, I'll call it, 5 to 7 years. The manufacturers do seem like they're really stepping up and providing new technology, coming out with new technology such as robotics, as Kate mentioned. You also have ballistic separators, optical sorters keep on getting better. So it's an exciting time from a processor standpoint. Sometimes the investment's substantial, as Kate mentioned, but it does. I think you can make a lot of these different pieces of equipment pencil out and make a lot of sense especially in these times when you can't find people, right? That's probably another 2-hour conversation on labor, but it's kind of my take. The manufacturers are really stepping up and bringing technology to the plate that's helping processors quite a bit, I believe.
And the only thing I'd add would be just to dovetail the connection between something Brent said earlier, and that is restructuring contracts such that we could actually operate and generate enough profit to justify some of the investments that we've made to clean up and extract more valuable products out of the single stream material that comes into the MRFs. That's been huge for us. And Brent hit on the other issue there is, of course, I think we're all dealing with labor issues. Even McDonald's is dealing with labor issues, offering sign-on bonuses to sell hamburgers. So the technology is going to be huge in that space as well, with the optical sorters and robots. So
great. Sorry, go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to add one thing as an example of investment. About 2 years ago, we installed a second optic because we were seeing so much more PET. We needed a bigger throughput on our optic. We repurposed the old optic to sort polypropylene, and we saw our polypropylene capture rate more than doubled because an optic is a lot better at sorting it than human hands, because polypropylene tends to be flat lids and containers. And at the time, the value for that polypropylene did not cover the cost of that optic. It now does. Yeah. And I just really want to highlight that, which is the value that we're seeing for material right now is really important in terms of being able to cover the investment that we're talking about. When you're getting 8 cents a pound for polypropylene, that's not covering the cost of the $750,000 to $1 million optic. But when you're talking about some of the values we're seeing right now, we are. And I think that's a really important thing to highlight, particularly as we're talking about policy and EPR. I think it highlights the need for the value of the material to cover the investments that are needed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm going to take a question from the audience that's basically talking about investment. Can you talk a little bit more about investments in film plastic recycling? What does this look like? And does this include any push for incentivizing reusable or banning single-use plastic bags?
Well, I know there's programs out there, and they're starting to become more available and for flexible packaging, I'll call it recycling. And there's all kinds of different industry links out there. And I guess I would say that it is possible, and there's equipment, and there are dollars out there to get through grants for stuff like that. And I'm looking into it myself. So I would say definitely look for those different groups that are putting those dollars out there for that type of recycling.
And I'd only add to that we produce, Sonoco Products Company produces flexible packaging, type packaging, and we've gotten a lot more thoughtful, if you will, about designing that flexible packaging to make it more easily recoverable in MRFs. So monomaterial flexible packaging, for instance, is a big deal in our flexible packaging group. So investments on our side in terms of product design to make it easier to capture.
I guess, I want to add to the conversation. We've been supportive of bans around plastic bags, for example. We see a lot of plastic bags at our facility. It costs us a significant amount of time and labor to deal with it. I know that there's technology out there. I think we need to look at this, though. Reduction and reuse is still the most environmentally responsible pathway. And so we really need to understand, where is recycling the right pathway and where do we need to do reduction and reuse. And so when you're looking at plastic bags, I still think that moving toward reusables is the best investment from an environmental perspective, but also from a financial perspective. With 400 plus MRFs out there, for us to outfit all of those MRFs with the capacity to effectively sort plastic film, you're talking about millions and millions of dollars. And so again, I really think we need to look up the hierarchy a little bit before we invest a lot in film. And I think there's still a lot of challenges with flexible packaging in terms of what are the markets, where are they going? I know we've seen some pilot projects, but again, are those markets really there? And what is the investment to outfit all the MRFs across the country, not just a pilot MRF to deal with flex film? I think are some of my concerns.
Great. I got a question here for Palace. Says, I'd love to understand how a vertically integrated fiber company like Sonoco views evolving plastic grades like polypropylene and mixed plastics. Do you see them as an opportunity or a risk to fiber quality?
I'm not certain I fully understand the question. Is it the plastics coming into MRFs or competing in the packaging space?
But I guess what they're saying is that there's just more mixed plastics coming into the MRF stream. And do you think that more and more plastics coming into that stream is going to affect the fiber quality?
Yeah, well, back to something that was said earlier with respect to technology that's coming along, right? We've invested in technology to help separate those things out. I may mention that we pushed a lot more mixed paper into our paper mills during the time when mixed paper was at just, I mean, you had to pay to get rid of it almost. A lot of the contaminants that were in there are plastic type contaminants. We are much better capable in terms, after some investments, to pull that stuff out and make a really high quality mixed paper product now. So it's less of an issue from the standpoint of being able to get the plastic out than it was before. If I'm answering the question, I'm not certain.
Yep. No, I think that makes sense. Hey, let's talk a little bit about COVID. Maybe this brings up the whole labor shortage issue as well. COVID, obviously a devastating disruption to the whole world. How did it affect you and your business?
Well, I guess I'll start off. I'll just say that, just like everybody else, we had to adapt, and this meeting's a prime example, right? We had to start utilizing, from a business perspective, more of these video conferences, and I think it's worked out pretty well. It's not quite like being in person, but it's getting the job done for sure. Mm-hmm. But second, the health and safety of our employees, for me, it's always been number one over everything else we do, over production, maintenance, everything. And for obvious reasons, our industry was deemed essential, and rightfully so. And because of this essential designation, we had to keep operating while the virus was affecting our employees. That was a very tough, I'll say, first 6 months until we understood what was going on. There were so many unknowns, right? We were trying to do everything we could. We looked at every step in the process, from when that employee drove onto the property and they got out of their car or dropped off or rode their bike, whatever. We looked at where they were traveling, what they were touching. Obviously, we did everything we could to keep them safe and distance. In some cases, in our smaller facilities, we would purchase trailers that we're going to keep now because we have more space to keep people distance. I think it's the new normal right now, right? In the first 3 months, it was really hard. 6 months later, we started understanding more. Today, we're able to cope with it and adjust our operations to keep people safe.
I completely agree. I think it was so much about safety. We also did things like our staff ate together typically previous to COVID. So we slowed down production so that we didn't have everybody eating at once, put up plexiglass barriers in the lunchroom to keep everybody safe. I think the challenge, which continues to be the challenge, is morale. I think people are tired. And so how do we stay diligent about safety, but also maintain that morale? Because morale and staff connection is also part of how you run a safe facility. It's how you build trust, et cetera. So I think it's just challenging. I think the other piece too is that we found we really needed to help staff navigate what was going on, particularly in the beginning. And I could see this happening again with the Delta variant. Schools were closing all over the place. So how are we flexible in terms of scheduling and childcare? And we're, when you're running a manufacturing facility, essentially people can't work from home. So how are we flexible with people in terms of those things? Because when schools shut down or childcare centers shut down, that impacts our staff. So trying to help staff find access to childcare in the midst of all of that. So I think ended up having to provide a lot of services like that for staff as well.
Great. Palace, anything to add?
No, I think Brent and Kate hit on every point I would have made.
And
can I say one more thing real quick? And, really quick, with the current commodity conditions and what's going on in the world, I think all MRFs are having the problem. You mentioned labor. I touched on it too. As processors, we are having to get a little more creative on finding people, but that also goes back to the investment in equipment too, which hopefully we'll talk more about that later. But finding people and keeping people is something that's a high priority, which are increasing our costs as well.
Can you talk a little bit about being creative to keep labor? I'm sure people would, let's talk about that for a little bit, right? Everyone's having that issue across all industries. Can you give us some insights into being creative?
One thing we've done is we've actually implemented bonuses. If you're here or at a site all week, then you'll get a bonus at the end of the week. And it's not I don't think it's a small bonus, right? It's anywhere from $50 to $100 per week extra, and that's substantial. And by the way, it's worth it. These people are doing a hard job. It's something that I have no problem with, as long as they're going to be there and not call off one day for the week, right? There definitely are stipulations to how to get those bonuses. So that would be one creative way that we've actually implemented.
I would agree. I mean, we did bonuses in different realms, and it was well worth the investment. I think it's trying to have flexibility. I think one thing we're going to try to look at, do we need to look at part-time options, which is something we've never looked at before. But, again, maybe somebody's having issues with access to childcare, or school gets shut down or quarantined. How do we provide flexibility there? I think the other piece, and this links to the equipment, as we see equipment get more advanced, as we see robotics, how are we upskilling people to come along with us in that process? So, for example, we created a new position in the last couple of years that's a machine operator, and starting to train people on so yes, the robot does actually need to be looked at every day and monitored. It doesn't just sit there by itself and operate. So how do you monitor it? How do you fix it? How do you look at the data that's coming out of the robot? So how do we upskill people and create career paths and invest in people? So, for example, all of our managers at the MRF actually started as sorters and have worked their way up into management positions. So I think investing in people is really important. But I do just want to highlight, I think we were seeing the shortage before, particularly on the driver side. So collections drivers, both in terms of recycling collection, we also do some of our own hauling of sorted material. And we've seen that exacerbated, and it is a true fundamental issue that's going to impact this industry if we can't get drivers to pick the material up. And we're doing everything we can, but there just aren't enough people going into the driver profession, which I think is a real challenge that is going to impact a lot of industries.
Right.
And Maite, I would add, and maybe everybody who's on the call today understands that we rely heavily on contract labor in MRFs and recycling plants to some extent. And so one of the things that we've done is we've really worked hard to be sort of the employer of choice for our contract labor suppliers. And we use them in bigger, broader ways beyond Sonoco Recycling that we think helps us to leverage that to make sure we have an adequate supply of folks as sorters. And the thing that Kate hit on there about drivers has been much more of a challenge, I think, for us certainly, to make certain that we have folks who are trained, and the area where we're in the bonus offering world is in that sphere, where with drivers.
Great. Thanks. And going back to COVID, I think we thought we were out of the weeds, but it looks like we're back in it a little bit. But thinking forward, we will get out of this. What will be like your biggest kind of takeaways that you think, like, obviously a lot of change has happened in the past year and a half. What do you think you're going to try to keep, like a lesson learned that you think actually is a good thing?
I mentioned earlier, we started slowing the system down and having a split lunch. I think we'll keep that. I think it's pretty obvious, but not shutting the whole system down and restarting it midday, there's definitely some efficiency there. So things like that, I think we'll definitely keep.
Great.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mentioned it earlier, but we actually purchased some extra space in some cases that we're going to stick with. It's worked out well. I think, and this is kind of sad, I guess, but when you look at the past, pre-COVID, right, I think people would probably come to work not feeling well, right? I think now, it's very clear that if you're not feeling well, you do not come to work, right? And that's something that I really hope sticks with us, right? We're going to keep the policy and just tell everybody, yeah, if you have a fever or whatever, you do not come to work. And in the past, I think that was kind of overlooked, but not anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about going into work? I know, obviously the manufacturing, you have people coming in, but on the management side, do you see that people will be maybe staying from home a little bit more working?
We're wrestling with that question right now as we see a uptick in Delta. I think, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had kind of all management and office staff just left and went home out of really extreme caution. I think we'll probably have more of a hybrid. I think our operational staff definitely felt a little abandoned in that process. And so we're going to have to find a hybrid there. So we're looking at like rotations where we always have some management on site, but maybe not everybody here at the same time, just for the decreasing transfer of COVID. But it's a challenge.
I think with respect to office staff, we discovered that we didn't skip a beat with the folks who were working from home. And many of the folks, I'm thinking about customer service, dispatch type folks in the business, have childcare issues that they have to deal with and so forth. And I think they probably felt pressure when they had to deal with those things in the past. Now I think everyone in the organization is comfortable with a person having the flexibility to work from home and be very effective. In fact, maybe more effective in some cases than they are when they're in the office and so forth. So that's a very positive thing that I think that we will maintain. We had the flexibility before, but it was muted, if you will, in terms of people's willingness to make use of the flexible working environment. So that'll be, I think, something we'll keep.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So the past decade has been really disrupting the supply chain, and resources have become scarcity. As we see these big commitments to use PCR in commodities, how do you think the high demand for PCR will affect the scarcity and supply? Or do you think it's actually going to help increase collection and create more supply?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Kate.
Go ahead, Brent. You go first.
No, I was just going to say, it does seem like, consumers they're becoming more aware and looking for more of that post-consumer recycled content, which is great. In addition, manufacturers of products, as Palace said a little bit ago, they're looking at their process and figuring out how to include PCR or change their designs. There's a lot of manufacturers that are really, I think stepping up and getting ahead of that game. Sustainability goals for brand owners seems to be more important than ever, which again is great. But that does come back to your question about, the scarcity of supply. I do think it's going to help create more collections opportunities for materials, especially in those areas where the diversion rates are low. There's all kinds of opportunities in those areas. There's definitely more material to get. And I think these types of programs are going to start bringing those collections opportunities to the forefront.
I think I would add to that. I'm not convinced that it's going to really, I think we're going to need policy in order to really facilitate investment in getting more stuff out of the trash and into the recycling stream. And I think we do need to look at things like deposit systems, et cetera, from getting more stuff into the recycling stream overall as an effective way to do that. I think the private market's going to be too slow and they're going to be stops and starts. This has come up a couple times in the chat too, but I think we're seeing in the Twin Cities, we're one of about 8 material recovery facilities in the Twin Cities, and we're all mostly at capacity. So if we're going to start doubling or even tripling the amount of material coming into the recycling stream, we're going to need massive investment in more MRFs. People's carts are full, right? The cart is with cardboard being so bulky. I think we're going to have to get innovative about having more capacity for collection. A lot of cities do every other week recycling. I think we're going to have to see weekly collection to keep up with the pace if we're going to increase. And so I think we really are going to have to think about policy as a mechanism to make that investment happen for sure. Because we're talking about Cody spoke about this morning, but we're talking about billions of dollars that need to meet up with that demand. It's going to have to be deployed pretty quickly and pretty fast.
Yeah. Great. Oh, Palace, do you want to add something?
No, I think they really hit on it, but there are a lot of things that are driving more plastics into the recycling bins and through our MRFs and creating opportunities for us to capture those and not have them go to landfills and so forth. So, policy that Kate talked about. We know that extended producer responsibility is here to some extent, and more of it's coming. There's no question about that. So I think everything the two of them said is spot on.
Great. So I'm going to take some questions from the chat again. With the announcement of advanced recycling facilities popping up all over the country, will MRFs plan to use this source for challenging plastics and residuals?
I'll just chime in real quick on that. So our company, GFL Environmental, we are definitely looking at the future. So when we design a facility, we are designing the facility with extra space, extra bunkers, places, pre-engineered really, as Kate mentioned earlier. When you drop in optics, it's serious downtime typically. So we're engineering our systems to drop in optics later. So yeah, absolutely. Looking at that stream and how it's evolving, and engineering these systems for the future is, in my opinion, it's definitely something that you have to do if you're going to design a new system. The other thing I'll say is, a lot is said about the new technology out there, and there's also, it's not just adding new technology, in my opinion, it's also utilizing the existing technology better. I think there's places to put existing technology in a system for better recovery. And I'll just use an eddy current as an example. It's a great piece of equipment, runs very well. There are other places you can put an eddy current and get better aluminum recovery. Just one example. There's others too, but yeah, the future is, in my opinion, designing a facility to be able to drop in other pieces of equipment so you can recover items that are going to be creeping into the stream.
Great.
I would just say I totally agree with you on the eddy current there, Brent. I see most facility designs have one eddy current. We actually have two at different points in the system to recover aluminum. But to the advanced recycling, we have a lot of questions and concerns about advanced recycling. I think we really need to differentiate between plastics to fuel and where advanced recycling is looking at doing purification or decoloring, for example. I think it's been fairly clear with the U.S. Plastics Pact and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we would agree with this, that plastics to fuel is not recycling. And so we need to make sure, I think, that we're being very transparent with our communities and our customers about when and if we use advanced recycling markets, that it's getting turned back into a product and not into a fuel. Because I think there is a real difference there, and we're starting to see a global consensus around that. So I think there's a lot to piece apart there around advanced recycling, and I think we need to focus on mechanical recycling and supporting those supply chains before we put all our eggs into advanced recycling. I think we've heard about advanced recycling under different names many times over the years.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to have a lot of questions about it.
And I probably differ a little bit from Kate's vantage point on that particular thing. We have a lot of plastics that go through MRFs that right now end up in landfills because there's no downstream demand for those plastics. Some of the toys, heavier type of plastics and so forth. And these chemical recyclers or advanced recyclers are providing a home for those items. And I don't know enough about the carbon balance around all of that to say whether or not making fuel from it is taking us backwards or making it go forward. But I do know that we're filling up landfills with a lot of that material, and having an interim step before you have enough cracking reactors out there to turn it back into monomer material. I think it's an interim step that is a positive one as far as I'm concerned.
Here's another question. Has the way you plan and budget for equipment upgrades changed due to how quickly the stream is changing and how many changes are made to the equipment? Are you seeing issues with being unable to upgrade a piece of equipment rather than having to install a whole new piece?
Well, I can at least speak to one part of that, Maite. We've got several pieces of equipment where we're simply changing the brains, if you will, and not necessarily having to change a lot of the other things around it. So we're buying with future in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So. Other thing I'd add to that would be, we do a lot of data analysis, and how our system runs depends on how wet the material is, the temperature outside. So I think there are a lot of MRFs that aren't fully seeing the potential of just changing the settings and the angle of the screen depending on what your composition looks like and how material is flowing. But I think we're going to have to get smart about figuring out how we tweak different parts of the system, because going back to that downtime question, we can't stop the flow of material very well. And so we're going to have to figure out how do we keep innovating. And I agree with what Brent says. We're gonna have to design MRFs so that we can add stuff in more easily and not be down for 6 weeks, for example, to install new equipment.
Yeah. Just a quick add is, when we look at something like that and adding or replacing equipment or rebuilding equipment, there's that option too. Labor, is there a labor savings? That's obviously a pretty big piece to these facilities. And then what kind of better recovery can we make? And, in today's environment, you can, like I said earlier, you can get a lot of this stuff to pencil out pretty well. But, we look at every step of the process, right, from beginning to end. And it is a process. We look at every person's job, what they're doing. Can we make little changes here and there to what a person is doing to make changes in how the system runs? And yes, you can. But then we look at each piece of equipment and how effective it is. And if we change that piece of equipment, obviously we look at how much more efficient does that make us? doesn't create bottlenecks in other places of the system. I mean, that's a big piece of it too. You can add equipment in the middle, but then you got other problems at the end potentially. So there's so many variables to that. And I know processors look at all that, but yeah, we try to pencil it out with labor, better recovery, and then obviously how much the investment is going to cost.
Great. Next question is, what role do you see consumer packaged goods producers have in helping recyclers with changing material streams, especially with plastics?
You know, I mean, I think this goes back to policy where we do need extended producer responsibility. We need accountability upstream to the design and material. I mean, somebody mentioned this earlier, but if we've got mixed materials, that causes huge challenges for MRFs. We need to work with packaging designers, and I think we're going to have standards around packaging. And, you know, I think there are a lot of questions about what EPR will look like in the United States, but there has to be accountability there upstream. Otherwise, MRFs are just running around with a bucket catching stuff, trying to figure out what to do with it. And it's not very efficient.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'd just say, you know, as a packaging producer, we have a lot of engagement with CPGs, and I can tell you they see the train a coming and are putting a lot of pressure on their packaging suppliers to make the whatever the packaging material is more recycling friendly, recoverable, recyclable, and hopefully something that has a home downstream. So
I think too, I mean, to go off of what Palace is saying, I've said this to so many brands and CPGs that contact us. A MRF cannot sort by brand. So I think this is where EPR is really important. So it's great if one brand makes their packaging type recyclable, but we're running somewhere between 25 to 50 tons per hour. We're not picking up every piece of packaging that comes through here. So we've got to have policy that helps create standardization because we can't sort by brand. And so I think that free market reward for doing what's right is really challenging in a system that needs uniformity in terms of packaging.
So going back to EPR, right? So obviously Maine just passed an EPR bill. Oregon's close to doing the same. As MRF operators, what are your thoughts on these policies?
Yeah, I would say it's coming. Pretty simple, I think. You know, it might take a little longer with having 50 different states and 50 different mentalities, but I do think it's coming. I mentioned earlier, it's kind of nice for me. I have a front row seat to how it's playing out in Canada. And Stephen Miranda is keeping me in the loop on that stuff, and I appreciate him doing that. But yeah, I do think it's coming, and I think as operators, you know, we have to get ahead of it and understand how it's going to affect our processing operations for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add too, I really want to make sure that MRFs are included in the conversation about that policy design. I think we sometimes get left out. MRFs have invested a lot, so we don't want to see stranded assets. And I think there's a lot of expertise out there. So I really think making sure MRFs are involved in the policy design. And I think we need to make sure that it's a multi-stakeholder process. We need, I think, brands and CPGs to be a part of the system, but we also need other stakeholders in that process to create guardrails along the way. And that includes MRFs as well as community stakeholders as well.
Any position, Palace? I know since you're could be.
No, I think Brent and Kate both said it. One, it's coming, and we're getting prepared for it. We have the benefit of having a lot of our packaging products made in Europe. And Europe is pretty far down the road with respect to extended producer responsibility. So we have, similar to Brent in his look from Canada, we have a look from Europe and are working with haste to be prepared, as prepared as we can be.
Okay, and going to start wrapping it up here, but there's one I keep getting. There's a couple questions around this, so I'll say this. Do any of you know of any resources, grants, or forgivable loans available to minority-owned facilities, well, or not, to acquire more equipment, particularly robotics?
I think there's a lot of different programs out there. I mean, you should talk to Maite. And the Recycling Partnership definitely has some grant programs, talking to some of the trade associations. But I would also just say on the robotics side, a lot of the robotics companies that we talk to, including we have AMP Robotics, have lease options so that you don't have to make that capital investment up front and you can lease the equipment over the life of it. So particularly on the robotics side, I think some of them are getting creative about how to make that work from a capital investment side. But talk to Maite. You also want to say.
And I think, have you taken advantage? Are there any state, like there seems to be a lot of state grants out there right now too, as well?
Yeah, talk to your.
Go ahead. You're going to say the same thing I was going to say. Sorry, Kate.
She threw it to you, Brent.
Oh, okay. No, I was going to say the same thing. Talk to your local state representatives, because there are a lot of states do have programs. So, and a lot of good programs out there too.
Great. So I think I'm just going to kind of wrap it up here. I just want to see if anybody has any kind of closing thoughts to share. If not, I can ask one more question. Okay. All right, then I'm just scrolling through to do one more. How are you furthering overall sustainability at your MRF, from renewable energy to electrification of fleets to use of recycled materials in capital projects?
I can take a stab at that. We have always, for a long time, used recycled content in the carts. I think that's a really interesting place. Cart companies can use recycled content. Sometimes impacts the color, but there's some innovative things that you can do there. I think also always from a MRF perspective, looking at high efficiency motors, the lighting, there are often a lot of state programs or programs with utility that help support the cost of that. So we have efficient lighting, high efficiency motors. Those, I think, sometimes things people overlook. And again, there always are a lot of programs through your utility or your state. We just put our first down payment on an electric truck, which will arrive here in January. So ask me next year how it went. We have a lot of questions on how it's going to do in the -30 in January. And then we are continuing to explore solar. We currently right now buy solar credits, but are looking at whether we install solar on our roof. We have 150,000 square feet. So we're a great option for solar in an urban setting.
Great. Anyone want to add one more thing and then we should wrap it up?
Yeah, I'll just say, our company GFL, the GFL stands for Grain for Life. And we, from the top of our company, sustainability initiatives are extremely important, and looking at different investments in that space is something you will see from our company moving forward. So keep your eyes out.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for participating today. This was an awesome conversation. There was a lot of questions that I wasn't able to get to all of them. So hopefully maybe they'll send them out to you guys. So take a look. Again, thank you guys so much. And thank you to the audience for listening and participating as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.